Hi, Scott. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So, Scott, you sent me a million photos, which are absolutely awesome photos, and I'm excited about them because they kind of show before and after. I also have a long list of questions to ask you. So I thought what we would do is just kind of bounce around a little bit here, look at some photos, go back and forth with some questions, and I think that will keep people interested in what we're talking about. Um,
Okay,
so
sounds great.
we're going to talk about just parking garages today for the most part, correct?
That's correct.
Awesome. And how are parking garages built differently than a building? Is it basically the same construction, or is it something that's completely different?
So the materials are the same. The construction is similar. It's just that they're laid out differently because they serve a different purpose. So essentially, they're way more bare. They're not meant to have architectural finishes. They're built to serve a purpose and to house cars. So that's basically the difference. It's not meant to be livable. It's just meant to serve a function. And so they're built a little bit more basically for that reason.
The overall construction and materials as far as steam beams go and concrete, that's basically the same as the rest of the building, or is that a little bit different?
Well, so they're designed obviously to support a certain amount of dead load, meaning a lot of cars parked in there at any one time. And obviously cars are thousands of pounds a piece, but otherwise it's the same stuff. It's concrete, it's steel, it's plumbing in terms of drains, it's electrical, some fire sprinkler systems and things of that nature. So very similar, but again, just built in a fashion that's really just meant to serve a function.
The other thing I like about the photos you sent me is you sent me some photos that are not very terrifying at all. They're just some kind of small hairline cracks. And then you sent me a few other ones that look pretty terrifying. So let's start off with an easy one here, which is just a hairline crack. So what is the cause of this? What does it mean? What's the solution?
Right, so cracks can form for a variety of different reasons. It could be some sort of a movement issue. It could be something related to the curing of the concrete, because when concrete cures, it shrinks and sometimes causes the material to crack. It could be rebar inside rusting, which is causing an expansion of the concrete. So, there could be a variety of different reasons for a crack, but it's a simple solution actually when it looks something like this, which is literally to take a grinder, you grind it open, and you just put a urethane sealant in there to seal it up. But the reason why it's important to take care of something like this is because this is almost like a super highway to allow water and salts and corrosive things into your concrete and start to rust your embedded reinforcement in there. So you want to seal this stuff up to keep that out.
So let's look at what I consider one of the more scary photos, okay? So what is going on here? What are we looking at?
Yeah, so that was the ceiling of a parking garage right there, and water had been getting in. That was actually at a ramp, and it had been getting in for quite a long period of time. And what you're seeing there actually is a combination of rusted rebar that the majority of it's gone. That's what some of those pieces are that are hanging down. There was also, this is a type of concrete that was precast, right? Precast meaning fabricated off-site and trucked to the site and craned in place. And it had these tendons inside of them, which are basically like a wire cable inside, and the wire cables were all snapped. And after we demoed away some of the concrete, we found how bad the reinforcement that was keeping this whole thing together really was.
Is there anything we're going to look at today, because people are going to ask, and I don't want to get too much off topic on this, but is anything we're going to look at today going to be possibly related to what caused the collapse in Florida, or is that still an unknown?
Well, so I mean, they don't know exactly why it collapsed. But the one thing that they do know is that there was a deferred maintenance, okay? Or, I mean, deferred maintenance is really a nice way to put neglected property for a long period of time. And, you know, if you read enough about it, you would have seen that there was engineering reports for many years that things needed to be repaired, waterproofed, stop water intrusion. And so, you know, I think something like that in conditions like this existed there and just got to the point where they couldn't support the load anymore.
So this is an item that you opened up, right, for this photo? Yeah. Okay. So this
concrete in these areas literally falling from the ceiling. And once we chipped away more of the deteriorated concrete around it to expose this, that's what it looked like inside.
What am I looking at here? Is this something that you guys did not end up touching that was visible to the naked eye, or?
Yes, so that's what it looked like when we got there. Okay, so what you're seeing there, just over your shoulder, is some concrete that had fallen off, exposing the embedded reinforcement, the rebar. And then the white portion a little further to the side of you that comes down, you know, that's called a T-stem, and the bottom of that is cracked. So there's actually multiple problems going on here. It's a sign of water intrusion, and again, something like this doesn't happen overnight. So this is something that's been going on for quite a long time and just left unchecked.
Is this a big warning sign? Because it looks to me like it would be. I'd be concerned about it. Doesn't look very good.
Yeah, I mean, something like this isn't going to collapse, but it's certainly something that you want to get taken care of sooner rather than later. You know, when it comes to concrete repairs, they don't grow in quantity at a slow rate. Instead of being like linear where it's 1 + 1 = 2, once you start to get deterioration, it grows at like 2 × 2 = 4.
And how long do parking garages typically last? I know that could be a ridiculous question, so feel free to say it's ridiculous, but how long, what is the lifespan of a parking garage?
So I don't know that there's like a final lifespan, but certainly 50+ years a garage can last. But really what it comes down to is how well do you maintain it? I've worked on parking garages before, you know, that are super old, ones that are young. And it's like, well, how often are you maintaining it, and how bad is it? I've gone to garages before where they've decided that the amount of repairs that it needed, it was worth knocking it down and building something else.
I see a lot of this everywhere, right? Different buildings, things like this. What is this about?
Well, so what you're seeing right there, the rust is from the rebar. And what's happening is that rebar was too close to the surface. Okay, when you have exposed concrete, you want to really have about 1.5 inches of concrete coverage over top of your reinforcement. When it's too close to the surface, the water, when it's raining and snow and ice, starts to get into the concrete, it'll lead to rusting of your rebar, and then it'll pop your concrete. And that's what you're seeing here. It was just too close to the surface.
And what is the testing process involved? So someone contacts a parking garage construction maintenance company and asks for an inspection. Can you talk a little bit about what's involved with that inspection, and what can a board or manager expect?
Right. So if you're coming straight to a contractor, most contractors are you're calling us up because you've already found a problem that you know specifically you want to get fixed. So what we're going to do is we're going to prescribe a fix for the problems that you're identifying. If you really want to get into the technical stuff about analysis and testing and all that, you really want to get a professional engineering firm involved who would do a condition assessment, evaluate your garage, and they might work in conjunction with a contractor to obtain samples of the concrete and send it out to a lab to do a lab analysis of the condition of the concrete.
That's interesting that they can actually send a sample somewhere and do a lab analysis without going into too much detail. What will that tell them? How long the concrete will last, what the causes are, what are some of the items?
So when you take a sample of the concrete, sometimes you can see the reinforcement So where the reinforcement is located in terms of the depth of the concrete. You would also find out the depth of the concrete, because concretes are all, I mean, parking decks are built differently from one another. So some slabs could be 4 inches, 6, 8, 12, right? So you would identify the depth of it. They can figure out the compressive strength of the concrete, how much chlorides are in the concrete that'll end up leading to the deterioration of the reinforcement inside of there. So that's kind of stuff that they would be looking for.
So here's another photo that doesn't look that great to me.
Yeah, so here you have another condition. So what you're seeing there is paint on the walls. Paint doesn't really offer any protection to concrete. It just dresses it up aesthetically. You have clearly some embedded reinforcement that's rusting. And again, that one looks like it was a little bit too close to the surface. And so you have this falling of the concrete from the rusting and expansion of the reinforcement.
Why would the original builder make an error of putting rebar too close to the surface? I meant, that's the second time you've mentioned that to me. And it seems like there would be some guidelines involved during the construction phase, right?
Yeah, well, the thing about it is, so construction is not perfection. It's done in the field. It's done by human beings. It's done in hot and cold and wet and all these different situations. And so when you're talking about a large structure and tons of rebar being placed, it's tough to say how much coverage you're going to get, or a particular area where the rebar is too close to the surface. I think it's just human error, really.
I don't know what this is. What is this? What am I looking at?
Yeah, so this is in what's called a precast parking deck, which, again, just to reiterate, that precast means it's fabricated off-site. They shipped it to the site, the pieces of concrete, and then they crane the pieces into place and connected them together. So what happens is, in this location, that metal that you're seeing exposed there, there's also supposed to be one on the complete opposite side. And you weld the bar between those two, and that's what connects the two pieces in the field, okay? And the reason to connect the pieces is so that it really makes many separate components work as one, okay? And so what you're seeing there is the stuff rusted, and it's spalled the concrete, and also it looks like on the one side the metal actually has fallen out or deteriorated, so it's not even there anymore.
So you've mentioned a couple times, there's a lot of different ways that parking garages are constructed. You spoke a little bit about prefab and things like that. I'm just curious, are there many different ways that parking garages are constructed? I made the assumption that they were all basically done the same way.
So there's just a few ways really that they're typically constructed. The most common one that you see built these days, just because of the speed of it, is precast, like I've been mentioning, which is the prefabricated off-site, trucked to the site and erected there. And certainly there's some portions of it that are constructed on the site, but the majority is built off-site and brought there. But there's also steel with concrete and metal decking. There's also cast in place, which means that they're forming it up with lumber or other types of formwork, and they're pouring it in the field. Another type would be a post-tension, which you don't see too often anymore being built, at least in the Northeast in our area. But that's that type. They literally, like the reinforcement there, you pour it and then you stress the cables after you pour the concrete, and up to about 35,000 kips, and then that's what creates the strength in your concrete.
I've heard some engineers mention in other live streams I've done, these tension cables could be extremely dangerous. Is that true?
Well, and so in the post-tension ones you can, because they're stressed at such a high level. That's the only garage you're really worried about, like the stress of the cables, because if you accidentally were to hit one and snap one that's live and in tension, it could pop out of the concrete with extreme force. It could actually kill somebody. You got to be careful there.
I see a lot of this also in parking garages.
Yeah, so you're seeing more of just the concrete needs maintenance over time, right? So the more and more you have water, ice, salts going into your concrete, it's going to get down, and over time it's going to start rusting your reinforcement. And a lot of times garages that were built many years ago, they didn't use epoxy coated rebar, it was just bare steel, right? And these days they build things with epoxy coated, so there's literally the steel is encased in epoxy, which offers some protection. Here there's no protection on it. The water gets in there, begins the rusting process, and then once the metal rusts, it expands, and that pops your concrete. And then the more that pops your concrete, the more everything is exposed to the bad weather and the water and the ice and the salts and everything like that.
And is it safe to say that these parking garages, though, people tend to think that they're just exposed to water, but there's all kinds of chemicals that come off vehicles or vehicles drag in from the street. Is that accurate?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so first of all, they're exposed to oil that might leak from people's cars, right? Nobody's car is perfect. Some sort of coolant if your car has a drip. Especially in the wintertime. Think about when you go for a ride in the wintertime after a snowstorm, and the underside of your car gets like caked up with these chunks of ice that have gravel, and they have road salts in there, and that's all stuck to the underside of your car. Well, once that melts off, where does it go? Right on your parking deck.
And we're definitely going to talk about how these problems are fixed and maintenance and all that kind of good stuff.
Sure.
Are we basically just looking at more of the same with this photo here?
Yeah, absolutely. Similar condition.
Now, you sent me this one, and it doesn't look that bad to me. It looks like I'm just looking at some paint that is, coming off. Is that what I'm seeing, or is it something else?
Well, so that's pretty close. What that is, that's a traffic deck coating, okay? So that's actually a waterproof membrane that you put on a parking deck that is meant to resist vehicular traffic, and it prevents water and salts and deterioration of your concrete. So a lot of parking deck owners elect to have one of these installed to protect their parking deck. But what happens is over time, when it's not maintained, it's going to start to wear away. And so here you're seeing one that's been beat up a little bit. It's been weathered over years. Looks like maybe some snow plows have kind of damaged it a little bit, and the cars are beating it up from just the abrasion of the wheels over time.
So in this particular case, for a manager or board that sees this, is this at the end of its life where it could use correction, or is it towards the middle of its lifespan, or?
Well, so what happens is it really depends. If this picture was backed out, you'd have to see, how much it, like what this one area look like compared to the rest of it. If this is a small area, as long as the rest of the membrane is bonded securely, you can go over top of it with another system. If you find that the majority of the system looks like this, you really want to just take it down to the bare concrete before you put a new system on there. Because really, when you put a traffic coating system, it's only as good as the substrate that it's bonded to.
Is this the same thing or something different?
Yeah, so that's the same type of membrane. What you're seeing there is that's kind of like a turn area, right? And so you're going to tend to find that turn areas are going to be worn away faster than other locations, because think about it, that's where you're turning your wheel and you're really putting a lot of tension on the system right there. So over time, that's where you're going to find the system wears more quickly than the rest of the garage.
So now we're getting more into the photos that I find a little bit more scary. I don't know if that's warranted or not, but we're looking at some cracked beams. You sent me that one, and you sent me this one. can you talk a little bit about what are we looking at and how concerned should boards and managers be when they see this?
Yeah, sure. So, you know, the cause of that isn't necessarily something that you can determine just from the photo, because it really depends on what's going on. But when you're seeing stuff like diagonal cracks or this particular photo, essentially there's something going on there that's concerning. All the pressure on this particular portion of the garage is right here on what they call a T-stem. So these precast pieces that get trucked in, sometimes this is called the double T parking deck. So literally, it's built, like this, sorry, but there's these two stems sticking down right here, like where I'm wiggling my fingers. That's one of them, and it's resting on a shelf. And so all the point load is right there on that shelf, and it's broken. So that's definitely something that you would look at. And if you saw something like this, you would want to get an engineer involved right away. They would probably recommend to put some temporary shoring in until they can come up with a fix for that.
So for a professional like yourself, you really do look at the direction of the cracks. It tells you a story. Is that true?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't tell you the whole story, but a diagonal crack most of the time is something that's typically structural in nature.
This looks like a simple one, or maybe it isn't.
Yeah, there's something going on there with water movement that caused the block to crack, and I mean, it's a simple fix. I mean, the importance of that depends on whether that block wall is actually carrying a load, or if it's just a wall that creates a room there, like a storage room or an electrical room, and doesn't actually bear any load. If it doesn't bear any load, it should be fixed, but it's not critical.
So this next one, I can't even believe that this would be allowed to reach this point. What am I looking at?
Yeah, so you're seeing columns, a column with beams connecting to one another, and you're seeing a lot of rusting of steel right there. And you think that that's something that's so one-off and unique, but I run into that all the time because, unfortunately, the unfortunate part of parking garages is when they don't produce income for you, they're not like sexy things to put money into. You don't fix up your parking garage and feel like, oh, wow, it's a new kitchen, it's a new, a new bathroom in my house that people are going to come and ooh and awe about. So, these things, it's easy to neglect them.
Are you telling me, Scott, that there's actually scenarios where no one has even thought about this until they call you, and this is your first initial inspection? This is what you find? I find this pretty shocking. The condition.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd be surprised at how many things I come across that are in way worse condition than they should be. And again, something like this is not a couple of months or a year. This is numerous years of rusting for it to get to this condition.
This looks just like more of the same, correct?
Yeah, that's a rebar too close to the surface right there.
I thought this was interesting. What's it about and how serious is it?
Yeah, so this isn't really that serious because if you look, that's a pretty big column right there, right? And just a portion of it is fault. But what you can see is that the base of it, right? So, the water is clearly ponding around that column, okay? And then, concrete's porous, so it's going to absorb the water, and that water is going to get inside and start to rust your rebar. So, number one, you definitely want to fix something like this because, think about it. Your columns are your structural supports. So you definitely want to make sure that those are well maintained. But the other thing you would want to do is figure out how to get that water out of there so it doesn't just stay around that column. And it really depends. You might be able to put a drain right there if there's some other drain nearby to tie it into. You could maybe slope the concrete away by building it up around there, which really just pushes it somewhere else. So you want to make sure that it's strategic in where you're pushing it to. But the key there is to not allow the water to just sit there and just over time just absorb and get into that rebar.
Are most columns that we're looking at, are they basically a metal beam with concrete around it, or is there different kinds of column construction?
I mean, basically columns are either concrete with steel reinforcement, or they're actually steel columns, like an I-beam.
This obviously looks like a water issue, right?
Yeah, that's a coating that failed, and it looks like there's a caulk joint running through it. And so essentially the concrete got wet, the concrete underneath failed. And so you got a couple of things going on. You need to fix your coating, you need to fix your concrete, and you need to fix that caulk joint right there that runs down the middle.
But this is an item that it's way better to get yourself in, or an engineer, and look at it right away, I assume, and get a professional opinion and say, look, you can wait on this, or you can't wait on this. Is that accurate? Or?
Yeah, right. This is a small problem right here that you can take care of very easily, and you can just call a contractor for something like this. I mean, very minor repairs, small repairs can be handled by a contractor. Typically, when you have to get an engineer involved, that's something where your problems are way more widespread, way more structural. You're going to need to get permits, you're going to need to get drawings involved, and you're probably going to even want to get maybe a bidding process going that an engineer could help you with.
Are there any particular areas of garages that tend to have more problems than other parts of garages?
Yeah, so when anything that's exposed to the weather is where you're going to have the most deterioration. So that would typically be a roof of a parking garage where it's exposed to the sun, and over time the UV rays are going to break down your coatings that we've seen, your expansion joints, your caulk joints. It's also going to be exposed to the snow and the ice and the rain. So you're going to find more problems at the upper levels than you will at the lower levels.
One of the questions that you sent me, which I thought was great, is what kinds of problems and defects would someone with little or no knowledge of parking garages look for? Well, Scott, I have very little knowledge of parking garages, but so far everything I've seen looks pretty obvious to me to be a problem.
Well, that's exactly right. And that's what happens is people might think, well, I don't know about parking garages. I'm not a contractor. I'm not experienced in this. What would I look for? If something looks a little out of the ordinary, it's a problem, right? Now, it doesn't mean it's a severe problem, but certainly it's something that you should make note of, be aware of. And a lot of times if something looks serious, it probably is. And you go either call a contractor or an engineer. And the best case scenario is it's not as bad as you thought. Worst case scenario is you contacted somebody that could resolve an issue for you before it becomes major, like some sort of a collapse.
And just to remind the audience, we're definitely going to get into the maintenance and things like that. Now we're going to look at some photos that I really don't see the problems, and then we're going to go through them. But this is a common item I see in garages. I'm assuming I think I know what it is, but can you tell me what it really is?
Yeah, so this is not a thing that needs to be repaired. This is an expansion joint right here. And so parking garages, depending on the construction, they need to accommodate certain amounts of movement. And so there's large gaps there. That gap right there is probably 2 or 3 inches wide. And that's a membrane in the middle with some epoxy nosing on the left and the right hand side, the black stuff on the left and the right holding it in place. And that's something that's, has more movement capability than caulk, let's say. This is meant for vehicular traffic, so cars can drive over it. And when the garage expands and contracts for different reasons, whether it be weight load or weather, this thing moves along with it and helps to seal out the weather.
And just some technical items I thought were interesting. You sent me. Maybe you could kind of go through them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's an expansion joint similar to what we were looking at. And what's happening there is this was a joint that was actually installed incorrectly by a contractor who was inexperienced in installing this. And so the the membrane that holds the expansion joint in place wasn't adhered properly. It's possible that they didn't prime the concrete, or it could have been too dirty. They could have primed it and missed the window of time to actually lay the epoxy nosing in there. What you're seeing there is, whether you can tell or not, it's actually bulging out of the concrete a little bit. So there was an install error right there.
And that doesn't look like something the average person would pick up on. I mean, I would look at that and not see that as a defect. More reason, I guess, to have let's just jump in ahead of here a little bit, since I mentioned that. How often should garages be inspected? Because this is a prime example of something that I don't think the average person would pick up on. Yeah,
so you should somebody should be inspecting your parking garage at least annually, especially in the springtime after the bad weather's cleared out, to just take a look and see what kind of stuff happened throughout the winter. Did the snowplow damage anything? Is anything failing where you could see signs of leaks, water stains, where water's getting through that it shouldn't be? So just whether it be a property manager or if you have maintenance personnel, should at least walk around and look for some of these things: cracks, stains, concrete spalls. But I would say every 5 years, worst case scenario, 7 years, you should really get an engineer involved who can do a condition appraisal of your garage, and they're going to tell you the kind of stuff as far as what you need to budget for, what you should repair now, what can be put off for the future, and just what kind of maintenance your garage needs.
This is another item that I don't, wouldn't have looked really bad to the average person, but it's obviously an issue, correct?
Oh yeah, for sure. So listen, when it comes to parking garages, you need to have an experienced contractor that knows what they're doing, that knows how to install the materials. So that's one of those expansion joint membranes. Now, a couple photos back, I happen to say to you, there's a gland in the middle with some epoxy nosing at the left and the right. Well, where's the epoxy nosing on the right? It's not there because the person didn't know what they were doing, and they just covered it in concrete. But that's not the way this thing is meant to be installed by the manufacturer. So it's just an incorrect installation.
I always hate asking these questions because it always sounds like a commercial for whoever I'm interviewing. But are there a lot of contractors out there doing? Obviously, these garages are complicated. I meant you're keeping it relatively simple for us. There's a lot of technical and engineering aspects of this that you're well aware of. But are there actually contractors out there just providing absolutely poor work? And if so, how can an association really tell the difference between somebody who's qualified and not, without making it sound like a commercial?
Well, listen, so we are the only qualified contractor in the United States to do parking garage work. No, of course. No, so the thing is, parking garage restoration is really a niche business. And so there's not a lot of people out there that do this. You really need to know about how a parking garage works, how these different materials get installed. And as far as how somebody knows who to call, you really have to use your database, your network. Who in your company has used somebody before successfully? Do you know an engineering firm that specializes in parking garages that you could ask for a qualified contractor? Obviously, if you've used one in the past. Another thing you can do is, if you happen to know anything about the materials themselves, you can call up the manufacturer, and the manufacturer can recommend people that they know are qualified, they're trained, and regularly use their materials successfully.
Now, I think we're going to start looking at some photos where you're performing work. I'm assuming that this is one of these cases.
Yeah, so here, what you're seeing is we were installing this expansion joint at a shopping mall. So what you're seeing there, the black down the middle, this is at a shopping mall. This job, the reason why it's dark, it was actually done at nighttime because it was really an impact to the stores for us to install this, and they were upset that we were going to have to redirect traffic, and stores are very finicky about the people having full access to their to their retail shops, right? So we did this at nighttime, and we're protecting everything surrounding it. That's some pink paper just to make sure we don't make a mess anywhere. We sold the joint, peeled it all up the next day before anybody came in, and the shoppers were able to utilize it without impacting the retail stores.
And then we're going to talk pretty soon about the impact of these projects and for the residents. This is another, I'm going to actually do a before and after because that's what you sent me. Mm-hmm. So do you want to comment on this before photo?
Yeah, so that was a column right there. Now, what you're actually seeing is some of that was chipped out with jackhammers to investigate a little bit more, but you can see down the middle there was a crack in this column. And, you don't have the other side, but this crack kind of translated through to the other side of this column. So certainly that was something that was concerning for us, was a crack that translated the entire depth of the column there. So we opened it up a little bit to see what was going on. And, we don't know exactly what caused it, nor did the engineer who inspected it with us. But, when you show that other photo, I can explain what we did there. Right. So what this black stuff is, so obviously we had to take out the bad concrete and patch it back first. But then what this black is, it's called carbon fiber reinforcement. Carbon fiber is a very strong material, and they formulated it these days that you can actually apply it to the exterior of concrete, and it has the same kind of properties as what the reinforcement does that's embedded inside of the concrete, only this is surface applied.
So this next photo, I have no idea what this is about.
So what happened there was that was a partial collapse. So if you look at the portion on the left where the concrete looks damaged, that was a column, and the portion of it fell about 6 inches. So that column was, it was 6 inches taller. And over time, there was a lack of maintenance. Water was getting in there, and the rebar rusted, and the concrete fell off. And so when the concrete wasn't there anymore, it could no longer support the concrete above it, and so everything dropped a couple of inches. We actually had to jack that back into place, rebuild the column, and then drop everything back down, back into the place where it should have been.
I am shocked that somebody waited to that point to contact anyone about that. It just seems absolutely shocking to me that, you'd have a parking garage and you'd let it get to that point before you made a phone call.
Well, the thing about it is, in most of the country, there's a law that's been put in place recently in New York, but other than New York, there's nowhere in the country that has any mandate as far as inspecting or repairing your parking garage. And again, without it being this sexy thing that makes you feel so warm and fuzzy after you do it, a lot of people don't think about their parking garage. They don't worry about it. It doesn't produce income for them. And so for them, it gets neglected for longer than it should. And this is one of those conditions.
I would sure as heck worry about that if I saw it and I lived there, but that's me. This is just a couple more quick photos to go through. What's this about?
Yeah, so there was water getting in on the top of this parking deck, and this was a column that just the water got in there and cracked the concrete. And certainly, like I had said to you before, columns support stuff above, so definitely you want to make sure your columns are repaired and maintained to be able to support everything.
What am I looking at here?
So right there, that's actually repaired. That top portion that's gray, you're seeing some water runoff, which makes you think that something's wrong. That's fine. That's just water staining because the area above hadn't been sealed yet. But that gray area, that was a concrete shelf that supports some of those T-stems. Remember those double T's where there was the vertical portion coming down like that? Well, if I, right here, those tees sit on a shelf. Well, that shelf was deteriorated. Right there, exactly. You see that right there, how that sits on top of the shelf? That's what was repaired, was that gray area. You were seeing one of those shelves where it was all cracked and deteriorated. And I mean, again, so if that's the area that everything's sitting on, it's pretty important for that to be maintained, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and am I wrong? That looks like a pretty simple fix, right? Or
Yeah.
no?
No, it's not very technical to fix it. It's just important to fix it.
But if they had not fixed that, that could have just eventually gotten worse and worse and worse. Is that true?
Yeah, not only would it have gotten worse, but once there's, just like that other area where I said, hey, look, the column, once it gave way, there was a partial collapse where it sank down. The same thing would happen in those locations. Once enough of the surface disappeared that it couldn't support it anymore, you would have a parking deck drop. And I mean, who's to say how serious that could be? Because I mean, think about what happened in Florida with that tragic event that happened. I don't think that everything was so deteriorated that made it collapse, but once something collapsed, everything above it couldn't support it anymore.
This doesn't look very good. And I guess this is a repair section over here or versus a non-repair section, or?
Yeah, so what happened was there was areas that were previously repaired. There were other areas where it looks that needed to be repaired at some point in time and weren't because of deferred maintenance. And if you look, that crack kind of extends into the repair, which means that even though the repair probably cleaned the rebar there and put some protective coating on it, over time the rust kind of just spread inside of that and started to damage even the repair. So this is the whole edge of the concrete that was spalled. When we knocked that down, that whole edge had all deteriorated rebar in there. We had to put a form underneath and pour that back.
More cracks.
Yeah, this is more cracks in the ceiling. Something like this, what you got to worry about is this stuff falls from the ceilings. So I don't know when it's going to happen, and you don't know when it's going to happen, but it could fall in a car, it could fall on a person. So one thing you can do temporarily is take a hammer, literally just a regular hammer, and hit that. That's already loose. And anything that's loose is going to fall down to the ground, and you can just allow that to fall. So at least you took the danger out of it, but something like that in the near future you would want to repair as well.
I'm sure the residents, Scott, would be very comfortable seeing the manager out there with a hammer knocking the cement off. They may be better off calling you to do that.
Yeah, no, for sure. Sometimes buildings have like some in-house maintenance that can go up there and they can knock it down. But I've been to a place before where you look up and you say, geez, I don't want that falling on me or my car.
And this one's a little bit harder to see, but I think this is another one with possibly a ceiling.
Yeah, so that's a ceiling. Right there is one of those shear connectors. Remember before where I pointed out that there was metal on each side of two precast pieces that you welded together once they got laid in place in the field. So number one, there was a failure there, but actually what this is, that picture a few pictures ago where the column failed, this is a photo, and the reason why that gap is so large is because one piece is offset from another, because this is a portion of the concrete that sunk down.
And is this that connecting metal you're talking about, or is this something else?
So what this is actually a repair for that metal. Okay, so sometimes what engineers elect to do is put an external connection. So literally what they do is, that's a steel angle that gets bolted through the concrete, and it performs the same function as the steel that's embedded in the concrete. It's just another way of fixing it.
Why do all these photos involve this kind of white colored leftover material? What is that actually?
Yeah, so that's called efflorescence. And what efflorescence is water goes inside of your concrete. And then once it gets drawn out by the warm weather, it brings out whatever kind of sediments that it picked up in the concrete. And then the water goes away and it leaves the sediments on the surface. So that's what you're seeing is the sediments that got picked up in the concrete right there, just remaining on the surface. And that's a picture of a ceiling, okay? So the precast pieces, after they get welded together, they get caulked in order to seal the weather out from one level to the next, right? So that's water that's clearly getting through the caulk joint, which typically means that the caulk needs to be replaced.
Does concrete absorb water normally, or does it repel water? I'm just curious.
No, so concrete is porous, which means it absorbs water. Yeah, so water's going to absorb.
And looks like we're going to look at some more quick photos of rebar and cables, and you stop me if you need me to stop. There's a lot of different examples of repair work.
So these are repairs in progress, basically what you're seeing. And the one way I can tell that is you see how the edges are so square and so precise. And so that's one of the keys when you're doing repairs is not only do you have to find the perimeter of the deterioration and take it back to where your concrete is good again, but you need to saw cut the perimeter to create a straight edge and also to kind of key in your new repairs that you're putting back for a good bond.
More repairs, and you stop me if you need me to. This one looks a little more interesting than the other ones. That's just reapplying concrete. Is that what that is?
Yeah. What you're seeing there is concrete that's actually been fixed. Some of the reason why there's multiple colors is because initially these things were formed up with lumber. They were poured back with a material, and then after you remove the formwork, sometimes there's just some surface imperfections that you fill in after the fact, and also like the holes that you leave there in order to pour the material in, you need to fill them back in. But that was a bunch of those beams going crisscross in each direction that were all deteriorated. So a lot of deterioration all in one place.
More looks like work in progress. You stop me if you want to.
Yeah.
That looks like quite a bit of work going on there. I see a lot of this. Is this another expansion joint or something else?
Yeah, well, so this is a caulk joint, and this photo is interesting because what you're seeing there is the caulk failed on either side of the joint. This could be one of two reasons. Either, number one, there was too much movement for the caulk, which ended up failing it. Or it could have been a poor installation, which means maybe they didn't clean the joint edge too great, and so maybe it was a little dirty, and so after they installed it, one side of it failed because it didn't have great adhesion. And parking garages move, and so when they move, the things have to move with it, which is the reason why caulk has expansion and contraction abilities, and it's supposed to be able to move with it. And here, it didn't happen for one reason or the other.
Why did you send me this photo? What's this about?
Actually, what that is, that's actually not a problem. That's actually a solution right there. So the one thing about a parking deck that you want to do is you want to manage the water. And sometimes when you have a low spot, the way to handle it is to actually add a drain. Because remember when you showed me this column that had water sitting around it, and I said, you want to get rid of that there. And I had said, well, you could try sloping it away, but sometimes all I do is I push it 3 feet away. Well, now the problem isn't there 3 feet away. It's still got water there, right? So what do? You actually install a new drain, connect it to some other piping that's already existing in the garage, and you install it at the low spot. So now the water can't go anymore. The low spots where your drain is, when it rains and the water all collapses to that same area, down the drain it goes and away from your parking garage to avoid deterioration.
And this is obviously another drain.
Yeah, so what you're seeing there, that's a drain that's been installed, right? So the whole perimeter is the actual repair that took place, and in the center is the new drain. And that's the underside of the other drain you were looking at. Like, this is the process of yeah, forming it out and installing it. And there's different styles of drains, right? So not every one requires you to build out the concrete like that. I mean, there's other times where when you install the drain, you know, the new ceiling surface is flush with the adjacent surface. Okay, but in this one, you had to build it out a little bit thicker because of the style of drain that was used.
All right, so I spent a lot of time on that because I actually thought the photos were really interesting. Now we're going to talk about, you're there, you're going to start whatever process you need to start, and we're going to talk about what boards and managers can expect to happen. You sent me this photo. Maybe this is a good starting point of what a job in progress may look like. Is that true?
Yeah, so in that area, we're working on the opposite side of the plastic that you can't see right there. What you can see is we have plastic from the floor to the ceiling to try and contain our dust and debris from the rest of the garage. Also to direct the traffic around our work area. You see that orange netting is in the ceiling in order to contain the dust or contain any debris that can fall from the ceilings. Because don't forget, when you're jackhammering, you're kind of shaking the parking deck a little bit. And so if there is anything loose in the ceiling nearby, it could kind of make some of those pieces fall down, and you don't want it to fall on somebody who's either walking or driving through the garage.
So that was one of my questions. As far as the impact to the residents go, and obviously it depends on what you're doing, you spoke about vibration. Is that something residents are going to experience? Because concrete, it looks like it's pretty hard to dig into, or maybe I'm wrong.
No, you're 100% right. So it really depends on the level of deterioration in your parking deck. So if it's not so bad and it's not so widespread, it's going to be less of an impact. But I mean, if this is a very large rehab project, you're going to have a lot of jackhammering to take out the bad concrete. You're going to have drilling, you're going to have pounding, you're going to have noise, you're going to have compressors, you're going to have skid steers driving through there. So there's going to be noise and there's going to be a large impact.
At this point in your career, Scott, are you used to all those noises? Do you just go to a site and don't even hear them anymore? Like the average person, completely like going to go crazy. But I would assume you've been doing this long enough that you're probably used to it, I guess.
Well, so the thing is, like, I just know to expect it. And also, when I hear those noises, I know we're getting work done. Now, somebody else, I can understand how that's annoying if you're working from home and you live in a condo building and we're jackhammering outside and you're trying to have a webinar like you and I are doing right now. Certainly that's going to cause some interference there. But you also have to understand that it's something that must be done to maintain the structural integrity of your own personal property that you utilize.
And not to get sidetracked, but noise travels in weird ways too, right? You could be working on it and someone could be hearing it, 2 stories away, right? And someone else could not be hearing it. It's kind of strange how it works sometimes, correct?
Yeah, certainly you get impacted more depending on where your particular unit is located. If you're on the same side as the parking garage and somebody else is on the opposite side of the building, they're not going to hear it as badly. Also, sometimes as you work further down in a parking garage, the sound gets muffled by the floors above it. So it has less of an impact than if you're working on the top of a parking deck.
So besides noise and vibration, and there's probably not an answer to this, is there anything else that's going to impact the building outside of noise and vibration that boards and associations should expect their residents, to experience?
Also, it's noise, it's vibrations, it's traffic pattern changes. If you do happen to have some sort of a parking garage that generates revenue for you, it could impact your revenue, and that portions of the parking deck need to be closed down, which means lost parking spaces, which means lost revenue. So I don't know if I mentioned dust and just dirtiness, because just in general, as much as you try and contain the dust and debris, like you saw the plastic floor to ceiling, there's still things that are going to get out and just end up in the air and settle on your cars, and you'll notice some dust the next morning.
Yeah, I don't want to get sidetracked, but we've done hour-long live streams on RFPs where they actually suggest even mentioning dust and debris and, you know, giving contractors guidelines and saying, look, we don't want to end up with dust and debris everywhere, right? I assume you want to find a contractor.
Mhm.
It's important to take that into consideration, right, Scott, that there's going to be a lot of dust and you want to contain it, or you're going to have a lot of unhappy residents, I would assume.
Yeah, for sure. So you need to try and control it as best you can. And that involves stuff, sometimes it's plastic, sometimes it's fans, sometimes it's air scrubbers, which are basically vacuums that suck dust and debris out of the air. But you have to realize that you're never going to eliminate 100% of it. And the design of your garage is really going to dictate how much that affects you. For example, if you have one where there's a lot of openings to the perimeter, it's easier to facilitate that stuff outside of the garage. If you happen to have a garage that kind of goes down underneath the building into a basement and it's solid walls all around you, that becomes a little bit more challenging and you end up dealing with a little bit more of a dust issue.
So are we looking at something here where residents can still utilize the other side of the deck, or is this more something for you guys to get equipment and people over?
So what we were doing there, you would never drive a car over something like that. Now, let's just say if for some reason you did need to drive cars over something, you might be able to use steel plates like you might see on a highway in order to allow for that. It would really depend on the condition. There are times where you have to open up concrete while still maintaining traffic, so you do put steel plates down. But in this instance, we had to use these buggies to deliver the concrete to these areas, and you needed to get to the other side of it in order to pour concrete elsewhere. So this was just a little bit of a bridge for us to drive those buggies across.
And here's, looks like it's in progress here, correct?
Yeah, so that was after we poured the concrete. The guys are floating it and finishing it and stuff like that. And, you know, when it's all said and done, it gets cleaned up so it doesn't look as messy. But, you know, of course, when, you know, when you're in progress, it looks like a wreck until you're done.
So this looks like a pretty nice day, maybe late summer or fall. Can you talk a little bit about how the time of year could affect projects, the weather, what other outside items can have an impact?
Right. So we work mostly in New Jersey, also in Pennsylvania, New York, but I mean, the majority is in New Jersey, and the weather is the same in all those states I just mentioned. And so really, concrete and parking garage type of repairs happen between April through, let's say, end of November, maybe even into December, depending on the kind of weather, because really, for the most part, you want your temperatures to be above 40 degrees. That's the limitation on most different materials that get used, whether it's caulk or expansion joints, epoxy, concrete. You have to make sure it doesn't freeze, so you're concerned about the overnight temperatures when you're pouring concrete, because even you know, if you happen to pour it and it's 45 that day, if it drops down to 29 overnight, you got to be a little bit concerned about it freezing on you. So really, there's a limited period of time to get this type of work done every year.
So actually, people will see this live stream from many, many states across the country. So are you saying like maybe somebody in Georgia has a lot easier than you do, Scott, because they have a bigger time frame window-wise, or does everyone have their own unique circumstances to deal with?
Well, so every part of the country has like their own unique circumstances to deal with, but I mean, for sure they have a larger window, but like I'll give you Florida, for example, right? So Florida all year long, you can perform concrete repairs, but certainly in the heat of the summer, it becomes very hard to pour concrete because when it's too hot, that also causes a problem with you with your concrete, maybe curing too fast on you and causing it to crack. But the other thing would be when you're closer to the beach and salty atmospheres, that causes things to corrode more regularly and quicker, right? So everywhere in the country has their own challenges.
Does salt only corrode metal, or does it also corrode concrete? I'm just curious.
So it mostly corrodes the metal inside of the concrete.
And we talked about this a little bit, but I know it's important, so I want to just ask you again. what's the impact of snow and ice on a parking deck? Because to me, that sounds like the killer, right? Snow and ice and water freezing and.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when you have snow and, snow when it melts turns into water. Ice when it melts turns into water. That water also picks up the salts that you laid down to make sure that people don't slip. And then those salts, they dissolve in the water, they go inside your concrete and start to rust your reinforcement in there. So certainly the snowy, icy weather can start to cause some problems. That's one of the reasons why people will put some of those waterproofing membranes on there that I mentioned earlier, some traffic deck coating membranes. And even if you have them, there's also their own challenges in the snowplow contractor having to make sure that they don't damage them. So
I was going to ask you if cost was the only factor why someone would not do a membrane, because it seems like it'd be a great idea if you could, have a membrane compared to not having it. Is that accurate or not true? Or
so there's certainly a large factor related to the cost. What I find is people who don't have a membrane on there, after they do a large scale repair project and they see the value of the repairs, they end up putting a membrane on. But what happens is that membrane needs to be maintained over time. So it's not really a one-time cost. It's a preventative maintenance, but it's also something that's going to be an ongoing cost to maintain over a period of time. But at the end of the day, the reason why it exists and a lot of people use them is because the cost to install and maintain it is better than the cost to repair. Because there's not just a dollar factor, there's also a loss of use and disruption to your facility.
so is it a fair question or fair statement to say that you see a value in membranes and you would typically recommend an association looking at investing in the money for a membrane, or is that an unfair statement?
No, 100% fair, because like I said, number one, it's a preventative maintenance item, which means it's meant to reduce the overall maintenance costs on repairs and things of that nature. But definitely the disruption to your garage and to your residence, it has a big impact. And so to be able to avoid something like that in the future is another reason why that's something that you would want to invest in at some point in time.
And I guess pick your snow plowing company carefully, I assume, right?
Right. Well, listen, they're meant to handle vehicular traffic, but there's certain types of blades and certain types of care that a plow contractor needs to be aware of. There are maintenance guides that get sent with warranties and things to the property managers. Some people tend to pay attention to them, other people who don't. The people who don't, they call me the next year to come repair it. So I love the snowplow contractors.
I don't know what this is. I was just curious what's going on.
Yeah, so what you're seeing there is over time, these traffic coating membranes need to be replaced. And so this is one that's actually in the process of being torn up. And what you're seeing is that machine scraping it up, and later on, the balance of whatever can't be scraped up gets ground off to expose the bare concrete before you put a new one.
So that leads me to another question on my list. What can associations expect to see as far as your equipment goes? I see a lot of equipment here. Mm-hmm. I see a lot of debris. I'm assuming there's materials being stored somewhere. Mm-hmm. How much of a role does that all play, and how can associations participate in that decision-making process of what's going to happen?
Well, so, I mean, look, the job requires what it requires. So, I mean, you really have to lean on the contractor to determine what equipment they need to do the job. But some things you're going to see there is skid steers, different types of shoring for, as temporary supports when you're doing some jackhammering. You're going to, like I said, you're going to see air compressors, jackhammers. If you're removing coatings, you might see a machine like this. You might see large walk-behind grinders, which are going to grind off the concrete. So you'll see some different equipment depending on the scale of the work that you're doing and what your particular facility requires.
looks like this is more of some work in progress. You can just stop me if you want to
Mhm.
comment on anything in particular. I didn't really know what this was about. It looked like it looked kind of a little bit scary here. It looks like there's some kind of requirement to hold up something substantial going on here.
Well, that's exactly what that is. So that would be some temporary shoring that you would see. Okay, now this one happens to be a little bit more than what's normal, but the engineer was concerned with some deterioration of the steel. Like, for example, that picture you showed much earlier where you could see the steel. You said, hey, Scott, what's going on here? And you could see a bunch of steel around the column that was all rusted. They found some steel supports that were supporting all these beams that were severely corroded. And just as a safety factor, it doesn't necessarily mean that the thing was going to fall down, but as a safety factor, an engineer is going to say, put some shoring in place to support this. This is how they designed it. And we put this in place in order to perform the repairs and support everything above.
So things are pretty bad at this point. I mean, if you're up to this point, everybody waited too long to make that phone call to the engineer or to someone like yourself, obviously.
Yeah, this parking garage had a lot of steel that was severely corroded that needed to be repaired. So yeah, definitely this is something that took far too long. And if you'll notice the pattern that we keep saying, and I keep repeating over and over, too long, too long, too long. It is very common in my industry for people to wait too long. The thing about attacking problems early is, number one, it keeps the cost down. Number two, it avoids like some sort of a serious condition.
Yeah, and we're not even going to get into the legalities of not maintaining something, and like you said, even having something fall off and hit somebody in the head.
Right.
This looks like something that has been completed or repaired, correct?
Yeah, that's completed. That gray area, later on we painted it to match, but we replaced that angle right there that connected the beam to the that column, because that was one of those things that you just saw, that shoring previously. That was one of the areas where that support was at the end of its life.
And this is more kind of work in progress. You can kind of stop me if you want to. I'm going to kind of fly through some of this stuff. It's a lot of rebar. This is another before and after, correct?
Yeah, so what we did there was, sometimes you can look at a column like this and you look and you say, geez, this column, it's great, right? Everything's fine, except it's deteriorated inside of the concrete. So they had us demo the concrete out around them, dig down a little bit, and see, this is even a little bit after, but what we actually had to do was weld some steel on to these columns in order to make up for the loss of steel that had just rusted away.
These photos here when I'm looking at them right now, I'm looking at, this looks like it cost a fortune and somebody let things get way out of control. Is that accurate?
Yeah, well, pretty much. It's something that had deteriorated for a long time. And this is one of those types of parking decks that I had said it's steel with a metal pan deck. And so what you're seeing is, these steel beams and girders running in each direction. And that's the beginning of us laying new pans. That silver stuff, those are new metal pans that not only act as a structural support, but they're actually the formwork to hold the new concrete. So those get filled up with concrete and they remain in place as part of the structural components of the parking deck.
Was that dangerous before? Because it looks like with the amount of work that you had to do, it looks like it was probably pretty dangerous, before you guys started working on it.
So yes and no. I mean, it looks bad, like, wow, this could have collapsed maybe. It wasn't to that point, but certainly once we took this off and we exposed the concrete, you have to take out all the concrete that's deteriorated. And that's how much of it was experiencing deterioration. Once you get back to sound concrete, it's hard and it's solid again.
I was just curious. You sent me this. I don't have any idea what it is. I was just curious. What is it?
Yeah, so This was just like a progress photo that one of my field superintendents took for me. And this is him standing on the roof of the office building. And that picture before that you were showing, this is more of those steel supports where we've laid the metal pans in place. And, we'll be after this installing the epoxy coated reinforcement and then pouring new concrete back.
I don't know what this photo is about. I don't know if you want to comment on it or not.
Yeah, that's just a ceiling repair. The ceiling was bad. We saw cut out we demoed out the bad concrete, saw cut around it. And what you're seeing in the middle there, these were kind of like two separate pieces that were coming together, and we had to maintain the integrity between them. So we put a piece of thin gauge styrofoam in there that later on we took out.
So we couldn't trick you because it looked like a wall to me. But you knew right away.
No, you right away. The photo was taken.
Yeah, you knew right away. Everyone else thought it was a wall, so you knew right away it was a ceiling. I'm going to fly through some of these. If you want to stop me. Mm-hmm. Is this a finished product, more or less, project here? If it wanted to be like this, is it constructionally sound, or is this typically?
Yeah, so that's afterwards, and that's a bunch of different smaller concrete repairs. I mean, look, when you're doing a concrete repair, it's going to look a different color than what the other stuff does, just because, age and weathering. And I think this also had a coating on it previously, so that's why it has a darker color. The new stuff, they didn't want to put the coating back.
This is some more after shots here. You can just stop me.
Yeah, just more repairs.
And then
this photo of one of those traffic coating membranes that we were talking about before.
And then I just have two more photos here. This looks beautiful. Obviously, it's finished, correct?
Yeah, so that was a traffic coating after it was finished. What they had us do was at the concrete islands, they wanted to use a different color gray. That was just, for their aesthetics basically. And it's pretty common to have your curbs be a different color. That way people are aware of them, especially these days when the people are sitting there looking down at their cell phones, text messages, whatever they're doing, right? It's very easy for them to not notice a change in height. And so the yellow highlights something like that. So it signifies to somebody like, hey, look out, take a step.
And there's another shot. And then I thought this was a really nice shot. And this is obviously coated, correct?
Right.
So we talked about the disruptions. You want to talk a little bit about you do provide an option for when to do this kind of work, right? You did mention that you guys will sometimes do it overnight, sometimes on the weekends. Is it on a case-by-case basis? Is there a cost factor there that sometimes plays a role?
Absolutely. So it really depends on the type of client. So when you're talking about a community association, which is the majority of the people who will be watching this, overnight really doesn't help because they're sleeping. So when I'm jackhammering, I don't think you want me jackhammering at midnight. Now, if you're talking about an office building, sometimes that's an option for them, or even a retail space when it's shut down and nobody's using it. That's when you can make the noise and it's going to be less disruption for them. So it really depends on the garage and the client and how that would fit them. Now, typically there is a cost factor if you say, hey, look, I can only work at nighttime, I can only work on the weekends. There would be some sort of a cost factor for that.
And obviously there's going to be traffic disruptions that associations should pre-plan for. Maybe they need to rent additional parking spaces, things like that. Do you find that sometimes they underestimate how many spaces they're going to actually lose? Or is that something that you guys could do a pretty good job of letting them know in advance?
Well, so I think that's the thing that the people don't think about enough is, okay, the only way to fix something is to shut it down. And the other thing you need to know about that is, you typically need to shut down the level you're working on and the level below, because if I'm jackhammering concrete, I can't have something below that could fall down and or fall through or jackhammer through and hit somebody. So you're really closing two levels most of the time. During that time, you need to relocate the cars. Where are you going to put them? And on top of that, the smaller the area is that you give me, a lot of times, not only does that add time, it ends up adding costs when I have to have 5 phases versus 2 phases. So it's very important to know how many can you give up and to be aware of that. And then where are the people going to go? Am I going to rent spaces nearby? Do I have maybe visitor parking that I'm going to eliminate to put the cars in? Can we repurpose some areas? For example, like, are there grass areas that maybe I can have an asphalt contractor come in and put some asphalt over top of it and put some lines there and let people park there? Is there a different layout in the garage that we can come up with to accommodate the cars?
So to me, that sounds like one of the most important conversations to have with the parking garage maintenance company, maybe the engineer, is what is going to be the impact as far as parking goes, because you want to have that all pre-planned in advance.
Yeah, absolutely. Typically, when you're getting to the point where it's a wide-scale relocation like this, you have an engineer involved. They know about this. They can guide you and help you think through that a little bit. I mean, you're still going to have your own homework you're going to have to do. Another thing that people have done is valet parking, but that's very expensive to literally have a valet company be on site to double and triple park cars and have to move them whenever you need to get your car out.
So I know this is a stupid question, but I'll be forced to ask. I'll ask it, or people will be mad at me. How long do projects take? I mean, there's no, you could sit here forever, right?
Well, so, if I had to just give you a range of time to make sense of, I would say a larger project might be 6 to 18 months. Okay, 18 months would be like a really large project, and the thing that's going to impact it is like how much work, how many phases, that's probably what you're looking at. Now, if it's just a small maintenance job, inside of a month.
The residents must love the 18-month long project. That must be absolutely terrific for the manager and the board.
So that's really what happens is, so the larger the deterioration and the longer the disruption, the over time, there ends up being some point in time where the people get fed up with you. And all of a sudden these complaints come out of nowhere that you're like, people start complaining about things. You're like, this has been happening since the beginning. Now all of a sudden somebody's saying, well, how come, the noise, how come I keep hearing the noise? Well, we've been having noise the whole time. But they just get so fed up that they can't even put up with it anymore. And, really a strong property manager who knows how to deal with the residents is very, very important to a parking garage repair project.
And obviously the unfair part is it wasn't this manager's fault for the most part, because this is something that should have been taken care of with preventive maintenance a long time ago, correct?
Well, so yeah, not only is it not the property manager's fault, it's not my fault either. I mean, sure, I'm the one making all the noise, right? But I'm fixing your problem. Okay, the problem is that the issues weren't fixed much sooner.
Yeah, I'm sure after the jackhammer's been going off for months and months, Scott, that people are really open to, what you have to deal with. So.
Yeah.
Just 2 more questions here to kind of wrap up. I always like to ask this: what is the biggest mistake or misconception that managers and boards may have, if any, in regard to parking garage maintenance or repairs?
Well, so the first thing is not inspecting and not maintaining the things early on. They let these things get to be so bad that they end up being these large scale repair projects that are very costly. So that's number one. But the second part of it, which is equally as important, is not budgeting for them. Okay, at some point in time, your parking garage, I don't care what type of construction, what type of materials they use, it's going to need to have some sort of repairs. Even the preventative maintenance items need to be repaired. And the one thing that I find is even people who are willing to do the repairs, there's a lack of budget in place in order to do it. So it's really a twofold issue there.
And my last question is, what will make a project go smoothly? But maybe a better question could be is, what will make one not go smoothly?
Okay, so it's the same for both things. It's the right team or the wrong team. Okay, so what do I mean by that? The right engineering firm. So meaning an engineering firm that's experienced in this type of work, so they know what the issues are, they know how to correct them, they know how to anticipate properly, and so they've already done a good job of identifying the problems thoroughly enough that there's no surprises for the owners. Hey, we didn't know about this, we didn't know about that. There's extra costs, there's changes, there's time adds, right? So an engineer is critical. The contractor is critical. If you have the wrong contractor, somebody who doesn't really know this work, doesn't know how to do it, okay, it's going to cause a disaster for you. You're going to have traffic problems. You're going to have dust problems. You're going to have tons of complaints. It's going to slow down the project. The engineer's going to have a problem. They're going to be coming back to you telling you there's extras for things. You're going to be arguing with the engineer, you know, and the engineer would say, well, you should have known this stuff. Okay, and then the last part, which I mentioned just before, is a strong property manager, somebody who can effectively communicate with the contractor and with the residents to keep them informed as to what's going on, what we're doing, where we're going, how long certain things are going to take, because for sure they're going to get complaints from the residents, and some things are valid and other things aren't, and they need to know which kind of stuff to filter to us so that we can help them with, and other things they need to know how to just kind of you know, get the people to just be understanding that the disruption can't be avoided, has to happen, and we're working diligently to take care of it.
Well, Scott, I appreciate you spending so much time with us on this, because it's pretty serious business here. Obviously, you know, you're talking about what could be life and death here if people don't take care of these things properly. People could get seriously injured. So thank you so much for being here. And I'll send any follow-up questions right over to you directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you having me and giving me this opportunity.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Scott.
All right, take care.